And welcome to our first FoLA general meeting for 2024. And the committee have been quite active in securing topics and speakers for some months to come. So hopefully you'll find the program interesting. Things have changed a bit this year because we adopted a new constitution last year after a marathon effort, so that resulted in our financial year closing at the end of December, which is the same time as our membership financial year expires. And so our annual meeting now will be next month, preceding our March meeting. And so there was details about it in the FoLA newsletter and it came out the last few days, and if you haven't got one, there's still some more copies out here. The annual meeting will commence at 7 o'clock, hopefully sharp, so that we can get started with our general meeting on time. We welcome nominations to our committee. The annual meeting only elects the committee members, and the committee within itself then appoints office bearers within that organisation. But we cannot accept nominations for committee positions on the night of the annual meeting. It needs to be beforehand, and the nominations can be made to me or to the Lutheran Archives, and the nomination has to have the approval of the nominee. So just keep that in mind, and we'll see what transpires. I'm hoping it's not out of order, but I just would want to mention the passing of Pastor Peter Fitzner. You might have noticed it on the LCA e-news and in the Advertiser. He was a past chairman of the board of Lutheran Archives, and he lived in retirement at Robertstown, where he grew up, and his sudden passing has been a real shock to their family and to their local community. He suffered a major stroke on Thursday the 15th of February, and he died in Adelaide Hospital on that following Sunday the 18th. His funeral notice hasn't been published yet, but I presume it'll be in this Saturday's Advertiser. But his funeral is at 10:30 on the 12th of March at Robertstown. And so I only spoke to him a few weeks ago when I attended the installation of Pastor Jacob Fabish to the Udunda Robertstown Parish, and he seemed to be in good spirits at the time, and a few weeks later he's gone. So, that has the wrong date on it. It should be the 20th of March. Oh, okay, I haven't got to that yet. So, anyhow, our sincere sympathy to Deborah and the 4 children from his first marriage, and the community is sort of feeling it as well. So I intend going to his funeral and sort of known him most of his adult life. Now, for tonight, hopefully you'll enjoy the presentation that's coming your way, and I'll ask Lois to come forward to announce the next meeting and then also introduce our speaker.
Good evening. Great to see you here. Jeff has told you about the AGM. You need to come at 7 sharp because we're going to have some very interesting presenters with us. Many of you will have, I imagine, come across congregations, groups of Indonesian Lutherans around the country here, and our speakers at our next meeting after the AGM will be the local Indonesian fellowship connected with Pasadena congregation. Dasni, who was a foundation member of that fellowship 10 years ago, we are celebrating their 10th anniversary, and Anthea from Pasadena, who has been working with them and has visited their families in Indonesia with them and so on. They will be coming to tell us about that fellowship, its history and its activities, and we'll see a little of Anthea's visits to them. And if you ever heard them sing hymns, you'll have a chance to sing hymns with them. They will sing them in their language and we will sing them in ours. And they've also promised us special treats, Indonesian treats for supper. So make sure you come early for the AGM so they've got plenty of time to entertain us as well as inform us about that Indonesian fellowship. So our talk for tonight, our subject for tonight, is not quite so far away, but we're starting the year very aware of the rest of Australia, in this case, Queensland. And our speaker comes from Queensland. She came from Queensland rather that makes her sound old, a few decades ago, and obviously she found it so attractive she stayed. The Stehn family originally came to South Australia, migrated to South Australia, went as fast as they could to Victoria and then as fast as they could up to Queensland. Jennifer might tell you that story a little more accurately than I have. But Jennifer grew up there in Queensland, in Headington Hill, and then came down to South Australia to study at Adelaide University and Lutheran Teachers College. From there, she went on to become a classroom teacher and then to move up through the ranks of administration and deputy principal, into curriculum. And she was, in fact, the executive director of the South Australian curriculum for right across our schools in 2000 to 2002. She was the director of that major project, that major undertaking. So very competent in that field. And since then, she's also been adding a competence in history, working on the family history and then on the congregation history of Headington Hill. It's a very interesting story, a short-lived congregation, and what is its legacy? But that is what Jennifer will be telling us about. Would you please welcome her?
Thank you, Lois. I'll wait till I think mic is turned on. No, not yet. Yes? Turned on? Might have to have two. Is it green or yellow? I can't see. No, it's green. It's green. Okay. All right. Not quite. Can't hear it. Anyway, I'll start. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this favourite project of mine. I have, since I retired from the Education Department, become even more interested in history and very local history. So this, what I'm talking about tonight, is the result of quite a few years of work within our local community of Headington Hill. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gauna people on whose land we meet tonight, and also the Giabal people on whose land this story took place. As Lois said, I grew up on a farm on the Darling Downs in southeast Queensland. The images that I have of that time are vivid. The little wooden house that we lived in, the wood stove, the view across the paddocks as the rain approached, the crisp chill on my cheeks in the morning when I went out to get the cows for milking, the walk up to the mailbox, the walk to school, the drive in the combi. There were 7 of us, so we needed a combi van. Every Sunday to church at Nobby. It's a panorama in my mind that I can call on any time. The 13-mile drive to Trinity Lutheran Church at Nobby involved a few dirt roads shortcuts, and they were shortcuts. They often aren't. One took us past an unkempt grassy area that featured a ramshackle avenue of pine trees. It was part of the scenery about 2 miles from our farm. My father was a great storyteller, but I don't ever remember hearing the story of that patch of ground. Did I just not hear, or did he not say? The patch of ground was the site of St Peter's Lutheran Church, Headington Hill, built in 1902 and dismantled in 1941. As we drove past in the 60s and 70s, hidden in the grass were the 47 stumps of that little church that sat there, and at the front of the block, 4 children's graves. What I now know is that acre of land was the hub of a community that, like the church building, is now gone. This is the story of that church and that community, and now part of the story of my life. So where is Headington Hill? We've got pretty advanced technology here. For when we have a change of slide, I do this. Where is Headington Hill? It's in southeast Queensland, on the edge of the eastern edge of the Darling Downs, near the foothills of the Great Dividing Range, and our farm was right on the foothills. Above the range and down below the range were common references in my childhood. The Darling Downs has some of the most fertile agricultural land in Australia, 480,000 square kilometres of it. Before European settlement, it was the home of the Giabal Indigenous people. By the end of the 19th century, there were very few, if any, left. They had died of introduced diseases, been killed, or relocated to areas inhospitable to them at Taroom and on Fraser Island. Another millstone of shame in our colonial history. The area was settled by European pastoralists in the 1830s. Headington Hill and Clifton stations were 2 of the largest in the area. In the 1860s, the government tried to open it up to small farmers, but 2 canny southern rich pastoralists decided that they would snap up the opportunity and use the old trick of dummying by placing relatives or friends' names on titles, and thus creating a very large stations for themselves. They were called Davenport and Fisher, and they were poor nurturers of the land through overstocking and overcapitalisation. They ran themselves and the land into ruin within 30 years. The land was resurveyed, and the government this time was determined to overcome the problem that led to the dummying situation, and now offered it up for sale again in 1898, and it worked this time. There were a few other influences apart from the changes in the legislation. The little town of Clifton became the centre of a land rush. The population rose tenfold over the brief period of the land lottery that was held. The enthusiastic reporter of the Darling Downs Gazette wrote this astounding article that I found that is purple prose at its best, talking about the, and I can't see down, the earth hunger. The earth hunger is the only term that can convey any idea of the rush at Clifton yesterday. And he goes on in this style, building up the picture of the overcrowded accommodation, the enthusiasm of the would-be farmers, and the fact that the rain had fallen steadily at that time, and so all of the hundreds of people who suddenly were in Clifton were walking around in the mud up to their ankles. He says knees, but I'm sure that's not true. And the enthusiasm of people putting in their bids in the lottery for the land, and then waiting to see if they were called. Clifton's a bit quieter these days. Clusters of German background farmers from Victoria and South Australia joined the fray, supporting each other to buy adjoining properties. One such group made selections in the small district between Clifton and Pilton that was named after the immense station that preceded it, Headington Hill. The families who settled in that area on adjoining properties are listed here. The Coalts, the Pakes, the Venzers, the Stehns, the Fries, the Holzfarts, Kreutzmanns, Barch, Huff, should be Hoof, I think, Huff, Hensel. And I've put up the photo here of Johann Gottfried Pake and Maria Pake as representative of all those families who lived very closely together from 1900 to the middle of the century. I think I chose this photo because I think they show the determination and the no-nonsense approach that was no doubt characteristic of all these families. The farms selected, did I miss that one? The farms selected varied in size in southeast Queensland, but generally in this area they were relatively small. The advent of dairying made it possible for small farms to exist. Between 1898 and 1920, the number of dairy cattle in Queensland increased from 80,000 to 448,634 just in 22 years, which is a great indication of the advances in technology associated with the industry. As the 14 families in the district were not well off, they relied on family members for labour and neighbourly assistance when necessary. When you see farming photographs from this time, invariably there are a lot of people gathered around doing the same task. It's because this preceded our time when you need one person perhaps pressing a button, or something can readily be done by one person sitting up in a huge header or in a huge tractor. There, the photos always have lots of people working together. And of course, if you only had a young family, you had to rely on your neighbours for that. It was, as we know, a harsh existence. The closeness of the community was for practical as well as cultural reasons. As I said, so here we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, I think five people working on corn husking. Most tasks on the land and in the home required more than one person, even though the photos I have are predominantly about the farming. Of course, when you think of the work in the home as well, it required a lot of people to make the daily bread. Their German language gave them a common bond. We're talking about Queensland here. We're talking about southeast Queensland. Together they started up a school opening in 1912, Headington Hill State School, which I went to in the 60s. And together, of course, they built a church. In the meeting on the 19th Sunday after Trinity in 1901, Brother Gottfried Paik offered to donate an acre of land for a church building. This is a quote from the minutes. It was moved by the chairman, J.C.W. Stehn, my great-great-grandfather, and great-grandfather, and seconded by the pastor, Otto Nichterlein, that the worthy offer by Brother Paik be accepted with thanks. I love the language of the minutes. They don't vary throughout the whole 40 years. As Lutherans, building a church was a priority after arriving in the district. At first, they held services in the Paik living room. This would have been, no doubt, a common practice across the country before the churches were built. They had services in people's living rooms. The pastor came out from Highfields, which is north of Toowoomba, which would have been a couple of hours journey in a sulky or on a horse. Brother Gottfried Paik offered to donate the acre of his land for the church. It was erected in 1902, yes, just 2 years after they came there, but also they had time that year because of a drought, a very severe drought, which meant there was little work to do on the farms. The specifications were simple, and they're there in the minutes: the length, the breadth, the height of the roof, the number of pews that could fit in it. It was opened on Trinity Sunday 1902 by the first pastor in the area, Otto Nichterlein. It took a while for this small group of people at Headington Hill to find their synodal niche. There were at that time 8 branches of Lutheranism in Australia. I have a copy of the letter that Lois translated for me from the congregation at Headington Hill to the congregation in Victoria, their most familiar fold, asking if they could be members of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Victoria. Familiar is the best. Those you can see under that church, the Stumps, that are still there on that acre of land today. The minutes of the congregation record all the improvements that were made over the years, all in the same formal language. They dealt with the planting of the avenue of pine trees, the fencing, the gathering together of chaff for the minister's horse, and who would be responsible for cleaning the mouse poo out of the organ. I think that was Brother Barch got that job. I have copies of the minutes of all the meetings of this little, was not so little, of this congregation from 1902 to 1941. Many of them, back one? No, must be forward one, must be an old copy. Can you go forward after the ministers? No, not there, never mind. Many of them, most of them were in German, and I did have, I thought, a slide showing the German minutes. Fortunately, my father and 2 other local men arranged in 1984 to have them translated into English. These minutes are a precious record of the life of a small Lutheran farming community. The originals are still in cardboard boxes in the Nobby Church Hall. They should be in the Lutheran archives. Now back to the ministers. the pastors at Headington Hill. There aren't photos of Pastor Backen or Pastor Darsale, because Backen was the pastor at Highfield who came out on his horse before the church was built. The Highfields congregation became dissatisfied with him, and he was sent back to return to Victoria. I haven't recorded here, but it is no doubt in the records that I've got why they became dissatisfied. Darsale came up from Victoria to visit the Darling Downs, and as a result of his visit, Pastor Nichterlein, Otto Nichterlein, was appointed. This was his first posting. He boarded at the Pakes, just next to the church, and he married, of course, one of the daughters, the seventh child of Gottfried and Maria Pake. He stayed for 10 years, riding his horse or his sulky, tending to his parish. Pastor Appelt, after Nichterlein, after Nichterlein, sorry. Pastor Appelt stayed 3 years. He was part of the new Lutheran ministry who trained in the Missouri Synod in the US in order to improve their doctrine, or as it says probably more appropriately, to be well equipped doctrinally, and most critically able to speak both German and English. So this is southeast Queensland, I keep reminding myself, where German was so commonly spoken. The next minister was Lutzi, who was there for 7 years. It was his first posting after training at Matoa in Victoria and Concordia in Adelaide. His adamant views made him a controversial figure in later years. The next one, the iconic Pastor Noack, who probably was known nationwide, but he was certainly a big, tall figure within the Queensland Lutheran community. He served for 13 years, and by this time there was a manse that had been built at Nobby. Later, after his years at the Headington Hill parish, he was instrumental in establishing Concordia College in Toowoomba. Pastor Quast was there in the difficult years of drought, war, and the dismantling of two of his churches, Mount Kent and Headington Hill. During its 39 years of existence, St Peter's Church was a strong and active centre of the Headington Hill community, with about 100 members at the end of the 1930s. There were, of course, all of the events associated with a strong church life. There were confirmations in the top figure, the lady on the left, my Auntie Ede, in the bottom figure, on the right, the short boy, my father, and above his writing, which I like to include because it is so characteristic of the time. He had polio, my father, in the early 20s. There were 13 weddings in that little church. The top one is my great Auntie M, beautiful woman. She looked after me when I first came to Adelaide. She was the wife of Pastor Paul Albert Muller, whom some of you may know. And the other one is of my Auntie Wynne and Uncle Max. There were christenings. Although I don't have a list of the christenings, there are photos. The baby that was christened that Sunday is down in the front row, the second woman from the left. But the baby actually belongs to my grandparents, who are at the back on the right, without the baby. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was godmother. Yeah. Parish meetings were held at Headington Hill, of course, and synod meetings. Someone might be able to tell me when synod actually was held there. I have different dates for it. Maybe it was 1926, but my father used to talk about and write about when it was synod, because next to the church is a farm paddock of black soil. And so there was this huge tent erected in the paddock for the synod sessions, and he used to talk about the aromas of the German food that was being served for lunch and afternoon tea. He must have been maybe 10, 15 at the time, so food's always on the mind of a teenage boy. More photos that I've found of events there. Look at the large crowd, the large number of people there. I think that might be, again, a synod photo. Down below, that little church, and I'm not sure what the event is there. Much of the community's social life centred around the church. Pastor Lutzi established a choir and an orchestra. My father told stories of the activities of the Luther League. I don't have any, I don't have record of the funerals that were conducted at the church, so there's always more work to do. But I do know about one that didn't happen there. It was of Dietrich Stehn, the old original who brought the Stehn family to Australia in 1858, and that's a picture of him. He was the one who came out from Schleswig-Holstein with 4 of his children, and he left Hamburg the year after his father, Hans Hinrich, died in the poorhouse. I think that was the message. We have to go. There was no possibility of owning land, and then they came out here and bought farms. Anyway, Dietrich died in 1916 on the family farm, our family farm, during a period of very heavy rain. The district was awash. The creeks were running high. It was too wet to hold the funeral at St. Peter's, so it was held at our old homestead, Holzhausen, the Stehn home. He was to be buried in Clifton, but the undertakers could not cross Kings Creek. So arrangements were made for the family to bring the deceased on the farm dray to one side of the creek, and the undertakers from Clifton would be on the other side. As the coffin was being transferred from one side to the other, it slipped into the water and the mud. An eventful end after a truly adventurous life. He rests peacefully in the Clifton Cemetery. The 4 children's graves at the front of the acre. Little Fred Cowald lived 1 month in 1904, and that's how the gravestone looks today. Paul Hensel died at birth in 1905, but that's an unmarked grave. We have not yet been able to locate it. The next one is the grave of 2-year-old Elsa Nichterlein, the 7th child of Pastor Otto and Maria Paik. Elsa died in 1916 when her mother was visiting her parents, the Pakes, on the Pake farm. She cut a finger when they were on her journey up and developed septicemia. And when they got to Clifton, realised too late what had to be done, and it was such a long ride on whatever vehicle it was that they had at that time, probably either a sulky or a dray. We have, as you can see there, recently renovated her grave. And I've been keen to contact any of the descendants of the Nictolines so they can know of this. They lived up at Glen Osmond, I think, when they in retirement. So if anyone knows of them, I'd love to hear. The fourth grave is of baby Anne Wieseman, a cousin of mine. She was stillborn in 1952. The Wiesemans lived on an adjoining property, and even though the church was closed by then, they chose to keep their little girl close by. The church was closed in 1941. Oh, there it is, the German minutes that I was talking about before. For those of you with good eyesight, might be able to understand some of that. I can't read it. Next one then, please. Yes. Gestern, heute und morgen. The three parts of our lives that are, I think, closely linked. Yesterday, today and tomorrow. The church closed in 1941. The building was dismantled. They're wooden buildings, so they can be easily taken apart. With World War II, the closing of the church, changes in agriculture, in its methods and infrastructure, the closing of the school in 1967, the community broke apart. I feel our yesterdays were broken off from our todays and tomorrows. Why did the church close? One of the big reasons was this fellow. His name was Konrad Ludolf, not Rudolf, Ludolf Daniel Wittenberg. He was a German immigrant shopkeeper and produce merchant in Toowoomba, and a member of the Trinity Lutheran Church and the German Independent Church in Perth Street. He was very well known in the community. He went back to England and he died in 1938. And when he died, he left an estate, the majority of which was to go to the Lutheran churches in the district. He was one of the main reasons why a lot of little churches in the area closed, even though he was so supportive of the German background people and their churches. He's not a very happy looking chap, is he? Something to do with not being able to see the top of his head. Yes. So on his death in England in 1938, 2/3 of his estate was allocated to what became known as the Wittenberg bequest, enacted through trustees in Brisbane, and I have all the documentation associated with that bequest. You can see the old typewriters, can't you, when you see that page, and see the triplicates underneath. So his bequest was that 2/3 share of his estate would go to the 38 Lutheran churches within a 25-mile radius of the GPO in Toowoomba. And it was so closely worked out in terms of who got what amount, and And it was worked out according to how many souls associated with each church. For people who are interested, and I'll have to work out with Lois how to do this, I do have the list of the 38 churches and what each of them got. I think it's a fascinating, having been through this experience, I think it's a fascinating topic for further research about the effect of the bequest on those other churches. I know it about Headington Hill and Mount Kent, but what happened with those others, I don't know, but I will. Headington Hill at that time had 100 souls. They got £137.7 shillings and 11 pence. I found out where the pound sign is on the keyboard as a result of this exercise. You can see I hadn't totally found it out by the time I did this. Mount Kent, with how many souls? That's messed up. 116 souls, they got, I put the pound sign in the wrong place, £159.7 and 7 pence. I think my mother was remarkable. She used to, well, so many people did who could so readily add up pounds, shillings and pence when we were playing games as children and as families. I'm sure, no, can't do it. He, apart from the delineation of the amount, he was quite specific about how the money should be spent. And there were 4 criteria. In or towards the erection, repair or upkeep of any building associated with the Lutheran Church. In or towards the purchase or provision of any recreation ground or facilities relating thereto for the benefit of the congregation. In or towards the expenses of hospital or medical treatment or the convalescence of any member or any dependent thereof. And in or towards the relief in any manner of any poor or needy member of such congregation or any dependent thereof. It's a very generous bequest and very open-ended and I think very compassionate. When Headington Hill congregation in 1939 heard that the funds were available to them, the whatever it was, what was it? £137.7 and 11 pence. The minutes show they wanted to spend it on their St Peter's Church on that acre. However, there's always a however, Pastor Quast and Brother Kessler from Mount Kent, Pastor Quast, who was serving both congregations, and Brother Kessler were the ones who went to the meeting in Toowoomba and came back and said that the money had to be spent on a new building. Herein lies a story not to be told here. How that happened, why that happened, and knowing the impact of the decision for these 2 little country churches. And it may be inevitable that they would have closed anyway, but that was the way it went. Where are we now? Next one. As a result of these 2 little churches closing, Nobby Trinity Lutheran Church was built using timbers from the 2 churches. It was halfway between the 2 little churches. I've only recently understood, this was the church we all went to. I've only recently understood why some of the Nobby congregation parked on the east side of the church and some of the parked on the west side. Headington Hill, Mount Kent. I suppose therein lies another story. Yes, as Nobby went up, that's what remained at Headington Hill, the 47 church stumps. I got a bit figurative here, the winds of change drifting over the district. But of course, when we think back to the 60s and the 70s through to the 90s. Huge changes in farming districts in terms of the decline in profitability of small acreage, closing of local cheese factories, increased mechanisations, little schools closing, so it was all, as it were, decentralising. In 1991, it was the 50th anniversary of the Nobby Lutheran Trinity Church. And at that time, they put up 2 commemorative stones. The one on the left at Headington Hill, and you can see the little Nichteline grave there behind, and the one at Mount Kent, which by this time the land had been returned to the farmer. And there's a group of the descendants, again with my father on the right, at that commemoration event. This is where I got a figurative again, the next one. The acre in limbo, 1941 to 2011, 60 years that acre sat there with the grass growing. And there's a picture of one of my nieces standing on one of the stumps with the grass growing over the heritage site. Some of the relationship tried to pay attention and do something, but what could one person with a little Victor do? He did a lot. He kept some interest in the acre. All this stayed in that way for a long time until 2011 when we had Stehn. We had the reunion of our family, and going to that 1 acre, the stumps of the church was part of the weekend of festivities. And then following on from Stehn, every 2 years we've had a picnic on the site. People camp there, they bring their tents, they bring their caravans. We take marquees. To start with, we had to hire a dunny. No one wanted to take it back. There were volunteers to bring it out, but taking it back seemed to be not so popular. During this time, 2011 to 2023, I spent a lot of time investigating who owns this acre. Because we were there so often, and then people were getting worried about what about legal liability if someone falls, hurts themselves. What about rates? Are rates being paid? And we liaised with the Nobby Lutheran Church, we liaised with the Toowoomba Council, we liaised with the local office of the council, and all I ever came up with was the acre belonged to the 3 trustees who died decades before. So the trustees were Carl Venz, JCW Stehn and Richard Paik, and it still belongs to them. Now, there was still the question of what about insurance? What is our liability? Oh no, they're the owners, but what good is that? Because you'd have to divide it by every descendant. If someone brought a suit against us, you'd have to divide it by every descendant, and that would be impossible. So we investigated other ways of resolving this and making sure that if someone did hurt themselves when they were there, that they did have somewhere to go. And so we decided in 2022, took a long time of investigation, and then in 2023 we formed an association. an incorporated association with the Queensland Government, thereby giving us insurance cover, but also giving us status, and we've now joined the Australian Charities. We're now recognised as an Australian charity. Also on the block, as more and more people have become involved and interested, people have started putting up, not people, just two really, memorials. The top memorial is not that one. Can we go to the next one? Top memorial was put there by my brother Douglas and his wife Avis to two of their daughters who died far too early. And the memorial below is to the wife of a local farmer. I have no doubt that this is a practice that will continue. Next one. Of course, we've done so many things on the block. We regularly mow it, we fenced it, we put new gates there, we built a dunny, we built a little shelter shed, we've put new gates down the front, we've renovated the Nectarine grave, and for that you need money. And so we have over the years done quite a bit of fundraising, usually on those weekends when at evening when we'd have a auction, and part of the auction was often some port from South Australia, which helped the auction proceed much more smoothly. So we did a lot of, I made those shorts that Stephen is wearing. They were brought quite a good price. They didn't get the model. But we were getting more sensible. We've now put in an application to the Queensland Gambling Community Benefit Fund for $17,000 to buy a ride-on mower. During this time, also every picnic weekend on Sunday morning would be a worship service. The focus has increasingly become ecumenical because as more and more people from the district see this as a hub, we want to emphasise this is for a range of families in the district. There's one of the descendants, Greg Coald, with his organ, used to bring his organ out to play for the service. Next one. So, we were incorporated in 2023. We have 42 paid up members, about to have our first AGM in 2 months, hoping to get more members by then, and have noticed there has been increasing interest by other local families, not just of the German background. It's an opportunity to renew this as a community hub. Just last year, we were able to, next one please, we built the new fence that you probably don't remember, why would you? But previous photo, front fences, those white palings, so we've reproduced that. And that's similar to the ones around the Nectarine grave. And that's the plaque we've put on the front fence for passers-by to know what this acre is. We also have up on the hill, we have in the shelter shed, we have more information for people. People are starting to call in. They're starting to bring their caravan. They're starting to just call in. We've got water tanks, just call in. Cyclists call in to refill their water bottles. And we have other functions there. So we're still in our early days, but we're very excited about what we've achieved and what's next. I'd like to acknowledge, as I said at the beginning, the Giabel people on whose land all this took place. Lindsay and Jenny Holmes, who are the current nearby farmers who've been close partners in this enterprise from the start. The Lutheran Archives, of course, and the wonderful help that Lois and others have given me. The Toowoomba City Library, Headington Hill Heritage Acre Association, Holy Trinity Church Nobby, Queensland Department of Lands, publications of Queensland Lutheran Church, Paik and Stehn family histories. And I'd like to add Doug and Ava Stehn, my brother and sister-in-law, who have been a wonderful, wonderful support to me, and their commitment to this acre of land and keeping things rolling has been inspirational. And it's to Alex Stehn, my father, who taught me to value learning and to love family. And finally, as the minutes always finished with, until they were in English, Die Versammlung schloss mit einem Gesang und einem Gebet. The meeting closed with a song and a prayer. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Now there's an opportunity for anybody to ask any questions. Yes, I'll just bring the microphone up here so that other people can hear.
Does your family homestead still remain?
The original Holzhausen doesn't. That's the thing with wooden houses, that they can so easily be taken down and used again in the next house. That doesn't exist, but there was a rose that we found where it had been, and my sister-in-law has, what do you call it? What do you call it, Avis? She's watching. Hey? No, she struck it so that lots of people can have it. And we're no longer, we were part of the disappearance of that community in the 70s. None of the original families are still there. There are people on our farm who, there was a man who raised horses. Now there's people who are locals who work in Clifton. That's the difference in the way the world works now.
Okay, any other questions quickly? Yes?
This is a very minor question. When the cyclists come along and they fill their water bottles from the tank, where does the water come from? I don't see any buildings to catch water off.
These are all farmers, all the sons and daughters of farmers. So they build a very inconspicuous looking shelter shed, and the runoff goes into a big tank hidden behind the shelter shed.
Okay, now Jennifer didn't mention here tonight, but she's written a book about this. 1 Acre of History about that settlement and church, and she's got copies here tonight. They're $35 a book. So if anybody's interested, see Jennifer afterwards, I presume, and then you can purchase a copy of this book, and you can see she's done a lot of work over the years for this general project. So if there's no further questions, I'll ask Margaret to move a vote of thanks.
First of all, a bit of useless information that Jennifer and I are actually related to each other.
Yeah, we are.
My parents wrote the Amped family history book, and Jennifer's in there too. Well, of course I am, but Jennifer's
And I'm not sure if you're in this one, the Stehn family history book.
don't know. I found your talk extremely interesting, sometimes sad, but still amazing. And even though we lived in Cairns for 18 years and would come down to Adelaide often. I don't think we ever saw Headington Hill, but we did visit Cess Logan in Clifton, I think. And I'm not sure where we drove after that, but I remember that we went past the Nobby Church.
That's right. And Cess took a number of services on a Sunday morning
At Nobby?
at the Acre.
Oh,
He's married. He's a cousin.
to you?
Everyone's a cousin.
Okay. Yeah. It's interesting that the church was dedicated on the 25th of May, which is now my birthday, but it was a long time before I was born. It's sad that it did close, but it's really special that the community is so strong and that people care about that acre with the church stumps and the 4 children's graves. And that is so special that people look after the graves and now where the stumps are. That is so interesting. So I'm definitely going to buy a book. I'll have to see whether Greg Cowell's related to me as well. He probably is. Even though I came from Victoria and your ancestors would have come from the Wimmera too, I would think. Yes. So we have a lot of things in common, which is great.
He's watching. Greg Cowell is watching.
Oh, good. Hello, Greg. Anyway, Jennifer, thank you so much for coming along tonight, and I'm glad that we caught you before you've disappeared back up to Queensland. It was so interesting. And we've got something to give you that Greg's, what's his name, Jeff, is going to hand. Two.
Yeah, don't drink them both tonight.
You can have
Thank you.
a glass in each hand.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. So now that sort of brings our meeting to a close. Just remind you about our next meeting, which is 21st of March up there. I think it was 19th of March. It's 21st of... Don't know, but anyhow, it's here on the 21st of March with the AGM 7 o'clock sharp, hopefully. So I hope you found tonight's topic interesting. You know, there are so many of these little churches that have come and gone around Australia, and this is one where you've sort of done your work to sort of preserve the heritage of that church, and all credit to you for what you and your group are doing there, and to the extent of writing a considerable book about it as well. It's certainly leaving the memory alive. And, you know, we here in South Australia could look at lots of little places that have come and gone. And I know some years ago when Reg Munchenberg put out a book about all the little settlements north of and out from Uganda and towards Morgan and down the flats, he mentioned so many different churches and cemeteries and schools there, and unfortunately his health wasn't up to sort of give a presentation of that sort of thing, but that would have been an interesting exercise as well. Talking about stumps, now I'm not sure if I should tell you this, but you remember Dr. Henry Pravey. He was ordained by his father when he was a pastor on Eyre Peninsula, and he was ordained at a little place called Warramboo. That also has a church that's gone missing. But in later life, he went back there on Upper Eyre Peninsula, and he brought home what was left of one of the stumps of that church. It had rotted off at the ground level, and he brought it home as his memory of that little church where he was ordained, and the church and everything else has sort of gone since then. So look, little things some people do to remember things as well, but you've certainly done this in style with what you've got up there. So look, you're most welcome to speak to Jennifer afterwards, and she'll have books available to buy. I encourage everybody to sort of think about paying your membership. We've got our membership bills out now. We, as an organisation, are concerned at the rate of loss of membership. And whilst we have still a healthy membership total, I think it's over 30 we lost last year. And so we're always looking for new members, and for those who can, to renew their membership as soon as possible. So if there's nothing else, I'd welcome you all to stay and go over to the church hall for some supper and fellowship, and certainly spend time with our guest speaker tonight if you wish, and ask further questions, or we might like to buy a book. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing as many of you as possible at our next meeting in March here. Thank you.